Hi, I'm Jan Norris, and Ashley Moe and I want to welcome you to the SLPs ABCs project. We are excited to be sharing ideas with you this year. This program is Module 1, and we will provide an introduction about the purpose of this project and then talk about our first intervention topic, phonemic awareness. So let's begin. After this module, you'll be able to understand the critical role of SLPs in reaching our speech and language goals using written language as a medium, explain what phonemic awareness means for your caseload, explore one phonemic awareness assessment, implement phonemic awareness interventions using a visual strategy system. So what is SLP's ABCs? It's a project funded by the Louisiana Board of Regents Workforce Development Division. The goal is to prevent our kids from entering the workforce without the skills needed for gainful employment. How? By simultaneously addressing oral and written language in our interventions and having fun while preventing failure. So why SLPs? What do we have to do with workforce development? Well, in the first place, 36% of our students with speech and language delays do not graduate from high school. Additionally, 35% with a specific learning disability also leave before graduating. And when we look at the populations of learning disabled kids, we find that most of the kids with learning disabilities also have a language disorder or show evidence of a language disorder. Thus, our kids make up more than 50% of the 4.1% of the students who drop out of school in Louisiana. Unless we can do a better job helping our kids make it through school, they're going to continue to be the ones that are unemployed or underemployed. What we once thought as speech-language pathologists, we would identify children eligible for services. We would monitor their progress in speech and language therapy. We would dismiss them when their test scores showed that they no longer qualified. And then generally, we provided no long-term follow-up without another referral. We considered them fixed. But the research, unfortunately, tells a very different story, as you can see by my black slide. 3 out of 4 preschool children with language delays showed reading disorders at age 8 years, even after they caught up with their peers in language skills. So whatever problems they were having processing oral language, they're now starting to show those same problems processing written language. Kindergarten students with poor oral language comprehension had poor oral and reading comprehension in 8th grade, so these problems don't go away. What about an early reading deficit? In this study, in classrooms, 6% of the kindergarten and first graders were identified with speech and language disorder, consistent with what we all know. 25% were identified with articulation-only deficits, but 25% of those artic-only kids later showed a reading disability. And when the children were identified with both speech and language impairment, 66% of those kids later showed a reading disability. So we're talking about an enormous number of our speech and language kids who actually have equal difficulty processing written language. What about articulation and reading? Kindergartners with speech sound disorder show poor reading ability in first and second grade, even though vocabulary skills were average by that time. So again, this was a study that didn't say the problems ended, but when they tested them, followed them up 3 years later, they all had the reading disability. Children with early phonological disorders generally exhibit academic difficulty, deficits in reading, writing, spelling, and mathematical abilities, and 50 to 70% persist through grade 12. The story doesn't get any better. Preschool to adolescence. This was a longitudinal study that followed 71 adolescents with preschool language impairment. They were tested at age 5 and then subdivided into persistent versus resolved SLI. And when they followed them up at age 15 and 16, the resolved SLI had good vocabulary and language comprehension, but significantly poor performance for phonological processing and reading. Those with unresolved SLI had significant impairments in all aspects of spoken and written language. They fell further behind their peer group in vocabulary growth over time because they're not reading. Preschool to adolescence, part 2. The preschoolers with specific language impairment were assessed at 15 years of age. This SLI group had poor reading, spelling, and reading comprehension. Scores were particularly poor if performance IQ was less than a 100. And outcomes got worse across time. 50% of the SLI were average readers at age 8, but by 15 years they were now reading disabled with substantial deficit. And comprehension. Few ever overcome their comprehension deficits. If they were identified as poor comprehenders in 3rd grade, 78% still showed significant impairments at 13 to 14. 13 still showed milder difficulties, 13%. Thus, 91% retained comprehension deficits. Unfortunately, language delays predict multiple problems. Moderate to severe receptive language delays predict long-term problems with school achievement, learning, peer relations, behavior. And the bad news continues. Arrest rates are relatively high for students with disabilities who drop out, with 1/3 of those spending time in jail, which is triple the rate of kids with disabilities who manage to stay in school. Other studies show that when they test prisoners, 60 to 80% show language impairment. So my question becomes, where is the SLP? Especially for the adolescents, when language impaired students need us the most because they're trying to stay in school. Services for language impaired children are often minimal. Only 12% of SLPs work in middle and high school. Only 50% of SLPs address written language needs of students in elementary or high school. So we were lucky we had SALSA, and SALSA started to help us all understand how important it was to work within written language and use written language as part of our interventions. So we're trying to continue the good things that SALSA started and help people understand that they really need to work on these things. Unfortunately, most SLPs do not receive the training they need to address the oral and written language needs of kids. So where do we start? This is the constellation model. And basically, it just shows the continuum of things that we're going to talk about throughout this workshop series. Over on this side, we're talking about things like, what is this phonological awareness and phonemic awareness? So information comes in through the sensory system. We have to take auditory features and organize them according to bilabial stop-plosive voice in our neural network. And we do the same thing with visual features by horizontal, vertical, curved lines. These need to get organized in our neurological system to recognize phonemes of English, b, h, t, and also alphabetical letters. These shapes have to start becoming, oh, a line and a circle, that's a B. A triangle with an extended line, that's an A. Those things need to get organized into syllable shapes. So we have speech syllables, and then we also have our orthographic or spelling rules that capture the syllables of written language. Vocabulary has to increase across age. We increase phenomenally in our vocabulary from reading, but that requires that the child recognize the word and also develops a sight word vocabulary. Vocabulary gains its meaning from context, and context is communicated through syntax. So the relationship of meaning between a dog and a bone, it could be the dog eats the bone, the dog buries the bone, the dog drops the bone. So basically the syntax and the vocabulary are going to help us understand that. We start to get higher level meaning through our network. So we take past experiences and we start to organize past experiences into these catalogs of information that we can pull up when we need it. So we can look at the dog's face and we can give him an attribute. The bone is good. So the dog is smiling, the bone looks good. Interpretation, he wants more bones. And then our highest level of organization is going to be the discourse structure, which can be narrative or it can be expository or personal. So basically, the discourse structure provides us the big context where we organize all of these ideas and read a story as long as Gone with the Wind, um, following all of the ideas and the many things that are talked about. So today we're going to be talking about this lower end of the model over here, the phonemic awareness piece. And as we course through the semester or the year, I guess, we're going to basically address higher and higher levels of language in our discussion. So, reading is a complex system. It has basically 5 components: phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. Comprehension is going to involve the vocabulary, the syntax, the discourse structures, the prior knowledge, all of those things. And they all have their roots in language and linguistics. So the challenges for beginning readers are going to be co-articulated speech is not produced as individual phonemes, and yet we have to match it to an alphabetical system that is individual letters. So first, we have to become aware of phonemes. Second, we have to understand the alphabetic principle, or how to map phonemes to graphemes. And it's really challenging in English because we adapted the Roman alphabet. They only had 5 vowels. Spanish only has 5 vowels. So Spanish is much easier to read, to learn to read. English has 18 or more vowels, and we map them into those 5 vowels. So basically, children have to learn all the tricks, the silent E's, the double vowels, all of those kinds of things to represent the 18 different phonemes with a series with only 5 graphemes. So we have to learn grapheme combinations. So the importance of phonological awareness. We know it helps children understand the alphabetic principle. It helps children notice the patterns of letters within words. So as you look at those words and you have an idea that it has something to do with the sound system and that the alphabet tells you the letters make sounds, it starts to help children find those patterns of double E's or silent E's or vowels that end a syllable or other patterns. It helps children generate possible words when unknown words are encountered. So if you can imagine the notion of a sound and how it can be represented with a grapheme, then basically you start to understand how to put those ideas together and learn to decode. It also helps children encode for spelling. So reading is decoding what somebody else has written. Spelling is encoding your own ideas. It's a very good predictor of an early reading disability. It predicts very slow development of reading, or it also predicts a long-term reading disability. Treatment in phonemic awareness results in improvement in reading. And we know that when you accompany print with your phonemic awareness treatments, then basically the children make the greatest improvement in phonemic awareness, and they also make the greatest improvement in print or grapheme awareness. So the whole theme of our series is going to be, if we can use written language to teach language, then we are going to increase both our gains in oral language and also written language. And again, there's a large body of literature that shows phonemic awareness improves most when accompanied by print. Test your phonological awareness. How many syllables are there in program, traced, butterfly, illustrated? Which word does not begin with the same sound? This one I had to think about. Thorax, thimble, thought, themselves, through. Which word has the same last sound as bees? Fits, was, this, pats, let's. This is fairly easy for a speech pathologist because we've studied phonology, we've studied phonetics, etc. This kind of a pretest proves very difficult for a lot of teachers, and you can imagine how difficult it is for children. Okay, some essential vocabulary for understanding reading. Phoneme, the smallest unit of sound that can mentally combine with other sounds and form words. And a grapheme, the smallest unit of letters, and that can be two letters like ch or ch for ch or oi for oi, because we basically don't have unique letters of those in our spelling system, that can mentally combine to form words. Both phonemes and graphemes are mental representations. That means that they don't exist anywhere. A phoneme is not a sound, it's your mental representation of what a sound is. So it's somewhere in those neurons that have networked together this representation of a phoneme. So somewhere in here we've got neurons that are linking for stop plosive minus voice bilabial as being some sort of a unique sound. And it's going to correspond with a grapheme, which is again some sort of a mental representation for a vertical line and a closed curve and a right orientation. So this mental representation is going to correspond with the p sound when we hear it. And this mental representation is a grapheme, is going to correspond with the external visual letter P. So these are the things we can actually physically hear or see, the letter P, and they have to be represented in our neurology as these abstractions and linked in our neurology. So this is what the challenge is for the developing child. Since co-articulated speech isn't produced as individual phonemes, again, the children have to become aware of those phonemes and understand the alphabetic principle. So this is a visual representation of what the child really needs to have neurologically in that little neurological construction over here. When the child sees the print, CAT, that has to be represented up here in their neurology as the grapheme for a C. It has to be associated with the phoneme K. Similarly, the letter A has to be represented with that grapheme for the curved line followed by the closed vertical line. That has to be associated with the phoneme ah. And the T, similarly, has to be associated with its grapheme, the shape of those letters, and recognized as the phoneme T. Now, because there's this structure, at, okay, is basically connected to the word cat. The word cat is represented to connected to the concept of a cat. So these layers and layers of knowledge have to be there for this system to work. So now if I have the concept of a cat first, then I can say the word cat, and then I can start thinking about the phonemes. The first sound I hear is a k, the second sound I hear is an ah, the third sound I hear is a t, and that's phonemic awareness, being able to go through the hierarchy this way and be aware of that sound sequence. And then I have to link it to the grapheme. I don't use a K for that. It's a C. Sometimes the K sound can be spelled with a K or a C. So I have to understand what grapheme is associated with that word, short vowel, the T sound, and be able to print the word. So basically decoding and encoding. However, kids who are struggling don't build a hierarchy. They just try to memorize. And so the teacher says, all right, let's practice this again. What sound does C make? And the child says, K. What sound does A make? And the child says, ah. What sound does T make? And the child says, T. But because it's just memorized and it isn't part of this hierarchy, then when the teacher says, so what word is that? It's not a word. It's three different sounds. So the child says, cat. And the teacher says, say it faster, k'ata. Say it faster, k'ata. Say it faster, k'ata, k'ata, k'ata. It can't become the word cat because it's not built into this hierarchy. Okay, so we've got our confused child who's going, D is for dog, and that means the letter D is for dog, but not the image of a dog, but rather the word dog. So this is the child who has that hierarchy developed that we just talked about. So this child has phonemic awareness. When we look at our confused child, D is for dog means the letter D is for dog, but dogs don't say duh. But the teacher keeps saying they do, but that just doesn't make any sense to me because the dog says woof, not duh. So I'll memorize it, but I don't understand it, and then I can't use it. So children who look like they have the knowledge may not have the knowledge. They might have this kind of a network in their little neurological system as opposed to the complex network that they need. So we're going to talk about phonic faces today as one option. Most of you who are around me know that I had a very dyslexic grandson, and this was the way we bypassed his inability to understand phonemic awareness. Typically, dyslexics don't acquire any of phonemic awareness until about third grade, and even then, it doesn't help them very much with their reading. So we were very desperate back when he was in kindergarten, first grade, and so I started to use my speech pathology background and said, well, instead of picturing the dogs, D is for dog, let's picture the D more directly as what your mouth is doing. So the line implies that it's your tongue reaching toward the alveolar ridge, and the circle goes inside your mouth and it makes a little drumming sound. Whoops, I'm sorry. Okay, so basically, and then the ah is like the person, little guy whose uvula is shown going ah, and then the G is the g down your throat. So now we could bypass the phonological awareness because we can say this letter makes the same sound as you're going to make. So you say duh, ah, g. Now listen to your mouth and tell me what word you're actually saying. So it gives these kids a visual way of thinking about phonemes and sound. So it's sort of a bootstrap, an iconic bootstrap into understanding what other people are doing auditorily. All right, more essential reading vocabulary, phonics, the system of letter-sound correspondence. So that two letters represent one sound, sh. Phonological awareness, the ability to think about the speech sound system in words, syllables, and phonemes. So here's our child thinking as his neural network is building. And phoneme awareness is the ability to isolate and think about individual speech sounds. So what is an individual sound? All right, phonological awareness. We're talking about the bigger chunks of language when we talk about phonological awareness. So we have to learn that English is an alphabetical system. Phonological awareness can be phoneme segmentation, which allows the reader to break words down into individual sounds. On the phonological level, it's going to start with the whole word. So first you have to be able to separate a word from a sentence. That's phonological awareness. Then you have to separate syllables from words, or separate your word into syllables, rather. And so that's phonological awareness. When you get down to actually hearing the phonemes within the segment, then it's phonemic awareness. Onset rhyme is another level. So if you understand onset rhyme, then it allows you to decode longer and more unfamiliar words. Once you can say at is a word family, and if I put an H in front of it, it's hat. If I put a B in front of it, it's bat. And I see the AT, then I've got a skill that started as an auditory rhyming skill that can now bootstrap my reading abilities. So for some of these reasons, phonological reader is one of the best predictors of early reading ability. Not later reading ability, but early reading ability when you're just learning to decode. And it's also indirectly related to reading comprehension. The more fluently that you can decode the words and recognize them, the easier it will be to comprehend what you're reading. Phonological awareness has a hierarchy that becomes progressively more difficult. Rhyming and alliteration is one of the earlier ones that starts at 4. Being able to break your sentence into words, that phonological awareness, is also a 4-year-old skill. Syllables by age 5, onset rhyme by 5.5, phonemes, being able to isolate a phoneme in the beginning, middle, or ending word position, 5.5, blending phonemes, 6, phoneme segmentation, 6, phoneme deletion, substitution, 6 to almost 7, depending on how complex the word is. Okay, so it's a continuum of things. So what can the SLP do? Most of you are already working on phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. We're just going to give you some ideas of how you can use some visual strategies like phonic faces to actually help also add the grapheme awareness and the print awareness to your work. So we're going to talk about the phonological awareness test. And I've got the input organized around the phonological awareness test because that's what I use in my class to teach my students both things at the same time, phonological awareness and also phonic faces. Again, when you look at the face, you see that there's this horizontal line or this vertical line. That means stop the sound. The curve means it's your top lip. So when you stop and pop, you basically produce that P sound. So the letter actually suggests the tongue placement and the lip placement and what happens in terms of stop plosive. The A is a wide open mouth, ah, ah, and the T is the tongue tip touching the back of the teeth. T, t, t. So children don't have to go, P is for pig, but not the word pig. It's but not the actual pig animal. It's the word pig in the abstract, but not the whole word in the abstract. It's just the first sound, which again requires a high level of phonemic awareness. In this case, you basically just look at it and go, oh, I use my lip and I go, pah. I open my mouth and I go, ah. I raise my tongue and I go, t. So we can break into grapheme awareness and decoding and spelling without having to have phonemic awareness. And as a result, you gain greater phonemic awareness. So what is Phonic Faces? It's a tool, not a program. Can be used whenever you want to make phonology explicit. So they can be used for phonemic awareness, for spelling, auditory discrimination, articulation, phonics, AAC. Amy Meredith in Washington State uses them for apraxia, and she has a whole summer program for children with apraxia and loves the visual input that's provided by the phonic faces to help her children figure out tongue, lip, etc. placement. So there are some people that are developing big articulation programs using the phonic faces. It's partially an alphabet and partially speech production cues, as we just showed. So it suggests a visual picture of sounds. When kids need them, they basically really rely on them for, until they have this phonemic awareness. One of the little guys that I had this summer who is a severe dyslexic, really can't hear the sound sequences, etc. But when he looks at the faces, then he, basically can visualize what the sounds are saying, and pretty soon he comes up with the words. So when he's trying to spell or he's trying to decode, he said, okay, I need to think about this. Put the faces out there so I can think about it. And then he can go in through that visual route and figure out the things that he needs. All right, so again, just a few more of the faces. There are short vowels like a, and there are long vowels like a. So Amy Ann is sad, so she's crying, but her mother, Miss A, is happy, like A, hey, day. So the vowels are matched in terms of a short and a long vowel pair. And that started in first grade. So in kindergarten with Austin, we had learned the short vowel sound a, but in first grade, he had to learn the long vowels. And I said, well, it can either say its sound a, or it can say its name, A. And I see the glazed over expression on his face. And it's like, okay, new concept, new face. But they're related to each other. TH, you can see the tongue pushing the out of his mouth, as opposed to the CH, where he's sneezing the H out of his mouth. The D, as we described, is the elevated tongue, and that's also stopping sound inside the mouth. Duh, duh, duh. Another stop. So in most cases, a vertical line implied stop, which was an interesting discovery. The R actually the shape of the R actually looks like the shape of the tongue. I took this out of a speech science book, and it actually looks very close to the actual shape of the tongue position that you're supposed to be in. She's a control freak, so she controls everybody with her meanness. The M looks like the Cupid's bow. The L looks like tongue tip elevation. Your phonic faces are going to be color coded. So some of the vowels. I don't know why that one came in first. Short vowels are going to be a. Miss A. He has one little tooth, so he says eh, eh. Now, the adult has all of his E teeth. She doesn't like carrots, and so she says, yeah. Now, the mother has to wear eyeglasses because she didn't eat her carrots. He tests his throat, goes, ah, and now he can make the perfect O note. She's thinking hard, Now the adult can tell you all the answers. There's also a baby Y. When he's a vowel, he giggles, E, or sometimes he says I, as in sky or try. Funny, puppy, silly. The vowels that have their own phonemes have their own faces. So Audi says ow, oi, aw, ooh. This one has the roach on her head, ugh. And then there's a silent E. The alveolar sounds are the tongue tip elevators, and so they include the D, T, S, Z. All of these are produced in approximately the same place, an alveolar ridge, and ol. So those are all those alveolar sounds. Additional stops are B, G, K, P. C has an empty mouth, so she doesn't make any unique sound. So she has to borrow a sound, either S from her friend Esther, or she has to borrow a K from Katie. Then we have some of the noise makers. Sounds like a fan. M. He's got his M&M candies here. N. He has an engine in his nose. V is the vibrating sound. And then is going to be that nasalized glide. The R family includes Arlene. This was a front view instead of the side view. She says the R sound, in the consonant form. Pirate Arlene says R. Pirate Arlene has an OR. And then there's Erlene, the twin sister, who's more like a tiger. So she basically says whether it's IR, UR, or ER. The general spelling is going to be . And then also in this category, we have the movers. This is a puppet jaw. Start high and drop your jaw. J, j. The W, whoa, whoa, whoa. His lips wave. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The WH is his twin sister. So she basically is curious. So she asks all the who, what, where, when, why kinds of questions. X is not a phoneme. So basically that's a ks blend. Ks. And Q is also not a phoneme. It's a kwa blend. And then we have the consonant digraphs. They're all the H sounds. This is the TH, that is the unvoiced. The two boys are the voiced. And then she's shushing the H out of her mouth, and he's sneezing the H out of his mouth. Ch. As we talked about, there are the short vowels because babies are short. Ah, little tooth, and and they're paired with their long vowels. So that's some of the vowels. AU is left off of this. Need to stick AU in there. All right. We're going to use some items from the TPAT, the Test of Phonological Awareness, to just show some strategies for improving phonemic awareness using phonic faces and print. So the first part of that test is rhyming discrimination. Do these words rhyme? Book look, fun run, ring rat, etc. So here's an example of intervention. Do these words rhyme? Cat, hat. This is a little train, and you'll also be sent the train. Establish the rhyme. At. So rhyme, R-I-M-E, refers to the letters, the last two letters that form a word family, or the rhyme family. And then add the onset. K, at, cat. Change the onset to make rhyming words. All right, so we're going to look at our at again. And if I put a p in front of at, what do I have this time? If I put a r in front of at, what do I have? If I put a in front of at. All right, this visualizes that whole process. If we were doing it without visuals, then we would have to say, okay, we're going to talk about the at family. And the child has to hold this at family, this abstract at family, in their auditory memory. And then we're going to say, okay, what about cat? Okay, so now they're going to have to go, okay, well, what does a cat have to do with at? If they don't already have the phonemic awareness, then you're expecting them to understand what you're talking about. So now they're putting cat in their visual memory, but they really don't understand what it has to do with at. And then you say, now let's change it to pat. And now they've got a third thing to hold in their auditory memory that doesn't seem to relate to the other two things. By using print and some of these little visual strategies like phonic faces in a train, we've got a visual way of thinking about this. So we can basically look back at, here's the at family. And now this becomes something visual that's going to be useful for reading and spelling later on. It's associating the phonemes that we're talking about right away with the graphemes. So make this sound with me. Ah. Make this sound with me. T. Now let's put it together. At. That's the at family. Let's see who rhymes with our at family. Oh, here's Celia. She makes the k sound. Letter C. She's going to borrow the k sound. So it's going to be k, at, cat. So cat and at rhyme. Let's see who else rhymes with our at family. P, at, r, at. At. So again, we've layered this with all kinds of visuals to help children understand that it's the last two sounds that are what we're rhyming, and that we can change that initial sound. So you can see that already we're teaching several things about phonemic awareness. We're teaching rhyme, but we're also teaching that there are sounds in different word positions, and that we can segment a word like fat, into the beginning sound, the middle sound, and the ending sound. And we can talk about how these two make a family, and this is an additional sound. If kids need stronger prompts, then basically I can put pictures, and I put actual illustrations up here, but I usually just use a whiteboard and scratch out quickly just some picture of, a round circle with some ears on it. This is a cat, this is a shoe, this is a hat. All right, so now listen, what word am I saying? I'm sorry. If I put a in front of it, then I'm going to be saying cat or shoe or hat. So listen carefully. And if they choose cat, then you can say, oh, did my mouth go k, k, k? Feel your mouth, look at your mouth in the mirror. I don't think that's what your mouth is saying. Let's try it again and go through it that way. This is another way to do this. This is called Spuzzle Rhymes. So the at family is basically on this shape, and anything that rhymes will make a meaningful picture. So it looks like the cat tail, or it looks like the brim of the hat, and so those two rhyme. I apologize for the quality of this. This is my little grandson Chase, and I was trying to hold the camera and play with these cards at the same time, but at least gives you an idea. Okay. You can also pair rhyme with puzzles. So if I've got the train and I say we're making the at sound and I put a k on it, am I saying cat or am I saying hat? And if I put the H on my puzzles board, am I saying hat or am I saying cat? So it's now I'm hearing multiple levels of visuals in order for the child to understand the concept of rhyme. Do these words rhyme? Cat and bug. That's another example that you saw in the videotape. Rhyming production. Tell me a word that rhymes with can, pot, brother, shower, monkey are some of the items off of the teapot. So we can use puzzle rhymes to help them with the production as you saw on the videotape, or we can use the phonic faces. So what word rhymes with it? And then you can prompt the child. What if I put a b in front of it? What do I get? Bit. What if I put a s in front of it? What do I get? Sit. What if I put an L in front of it? So again, we're using the train and the phonic faces together to build those concepts. Another phonemic awareness test or task is the segmentation task. This is when you have to take a sentence and divide it into words, the words into syllables, the syllables into phonemes, with that being the phonemic awareness task and the most difficult. Tell me each sound in the word want. So the child would have to be able to say w, ah, t. Okay. Segmenting the sentences. Another thing that I worked with Austin was sight words. He basically had difficulty understanding sight words and memorizing them. So we started picturing the letters inside of words. So my would have been my hand touching myself. And so basically I've added phonic faces to that concept so we get the sound and the picture at the same time. And then the at looks like the shape of the cat. So we can capture that notion that we have to produce sounds, but that the sounds have to have meaning. And so you have meaning and sound pictured at the same time. So now that we have the individual words, then we can use the individual words to chop a sentence into words. We can also use phonic faces by giving a sound cue to the first words. So the lines represent the words in the sentence. My cat is black. So we have 4 lines demonstrating that there are actually 4 words, and we prompt the child. What was the first word? My. What was the second word? Cat. What was the third word? Is. What was the fourth word? Black. And we actually write the words as we're doing this so that the child gets that concept of wordness, and that words have something to do with sounds, and that the sounds have something to do with the letters. So we're doing all that we can to prompt that phoneme grapheme tie-in. Segmenting syllables. We can use phonic faces to show different syllable shapes. I've done a demonstration here with a longer word, pocket. The syllable shape is going to be, if it's a short vowel, then the vowel is between 2 consonants. So when we look at this word pocket, we find the vowels. That tells us that there's 2 syllables. 2 vowel sounds in a word mean that it's going to have 2 syllables. That doesn't mean 2 vowel letters, because again, we use so many vowel letters to just represent the 18 different vowel phonemes. So it's going to be 2 unique vowel sounds. So you find the vowel sounds, and then you say, okay, if there's 2 consonants together, you have to split the syllables between those 2 consonants, because those kids talk to each other. Teacher doesn't like kids talking to each other, so she moves them apart. Okay, so now we have this syllable pattern, consonant, vowel, consonant. So that's going to be a short vowel, pock, pock. So again, we're helping children. How many syllables in the word pocket? It's going to be 2 syllables. Pock is 1, cat is 2. It's going to be baby vowel, ah, because the baby is protected on both sides by kids. The vowels are either babies or adults, and the consonants are kids. So the kids take care of the babies. If there's kids on both sides, it's a short vowel. Here again, we've got two kids taking care of the baby. It's a short vowel. So it's a visual way of showing kids that you have one word, pocket, and you can pull the word apart into syllables. And they can see this letter relationship to the idea that the auditory word pocket has two syllables. So again, find the vowels, feel your jaw move. There's only one consonant, so try breaking it after the consonant. And that gives you the short vowel, sev. If a syllable begins with a short vowel, it's usually short. So, I'm sorry, if a syllable begins with a vowel, it's usually short. So like about, whatever, and it's accompanied by a consonant, then it's generally going to be short. If it's the opposite, so the vowel ends the syllable, then it's usually long. Helping you remember your elementary. So sev and feel your jaw moved. A syllable is basically all of the articulation movements that you make in one jaw movement. So I have kids feel their jaw, sev, and they can feel their jaw actually moving down and coming back up again, sev, in order to hear that syllable. And we also can engage the kids in robot talk, sev, and my name is Jan. So you basically can help them with robot talk too, helping them understand the notion of a syllable. And we can use the phonic faces to basically show that. On the train, I'll often put the first syllable out, sev, and then move it to the top of the train, and then we'll work out the second syllable so that they can see that on the train that each of the syllables has a beginning, middle, and ending sound, or in the case of the second syllable, and two sounds. Now down to the segmenting of phonemes. Tell me each sound in off, fat, brag, or some of the items off of the TPAT. And again, we can use the train, ah, to show that. S, e, sh, l. We can use the train to show that first syllable, C, and then the second syllable, sh, L. This is long vowel E because he ends the syllable. So basically you can't leave a baby by himself at the end of a syllable. So the grown-up comes in to take care of the baby or in place of the baby. This baby gets to stay because it's between two kids or two consonants. Sh, L. So the phonic faces represents, because they represent every phoneme and not just spelling patterns, the spelling pattern is one entity. So basically it helps phonemic awareness because the children can hear the sh, o, but it also helps spelling or grapheme awareness because they can see that the sh sound is actually made with two letters. Another TPAT task, what's the beginning, middle, ending sound in rat? Deletion, say dog house without the dog, say beaver without the ver. Substitution, say cat but change t to n. And blending, what word is this at the syllable level? Da, o. What word is this? S, a, n, d. So for the isolation task, some of their items are bite, dinosaur, apple, happy, chalk. What's the beginning sound in each word? I can use morphophonic faces to show them because basically that first letter is represented as the phonic face and the rest is represented as the meaning. Or the phonic faces in the train that you're getting. Apple. What's the first sound? A. Middle sound P. Last sound O. First sound A. Same with the final sound. Some of their items are bug, math, wish, bear, please. So again, you can see that they're dealing with a lot of the digraphs. Shh. What sound is heard? Bug, bug, g is at the caboose of the train. So that's the last sound of the final sound. Also, you can pair the phonic faces with the Spuzzo cards. Take away the first sound, that leaves you the rhyme. The rhyme can be divided into the and the g. So lots of visuals to help the children understand how words are composed of phonemes, how phonemes can be grouped into bigger chunks like rhyme, and how when all of them are put together, it's a meaningful word. Medial sounds are really tough. Some of the items on the teapot are cup and, coin, sky, so a blend, moon. And again, that phoneme is represented by two graphemes. So what word is heard? Oin. The middle sound is oi. Coin. Oh, this is an example if the child can't hear the middle sound. Then you can basically put up several phonic faces choices. So listen to the middle when I say it. Coin, coin, coin. Is my mouth saying oi? Is it saying ah? Is it saying ooh? If the child chooses the ah sound, then I'd say that tells my mouth to say con, con. If they choose the ooh sound, that tells my mouth to say coon, coon. So when they choose this sound, they got it correct. Oi, oi, you've got my mouth doing the right movement. Coin, coin. Deletions, compounds, and syllables. Again, teapot items. Say the word X, but don't say X. So say mailbox, but don't say box. Say birdhouse, but don't say bird. And then it gets down to syllables. Say umbrella, but don't say Say the word chairman, but don't say man. So I've used, this is a compound word, so I've used them morphophonic faces to show the two pieces of the word. When I take away the man, I'm left with chair. So it's a visual demonstration. You can do this by just drawing pictures on a whiteboard of a chair and a man, and then erase the man. Say the word umbrella, but don't say So we've got the word umbrella spelled out in phonic faces. Tells my mouth there's 3 syllables. And when I take away the I'm left with brella. So take away the brella. You'll have a zipper in your phonic faces, and that basically means you can silence things. So Mr. E is silenced when he's at the end of words, and so he doesn't say anything, but the parent silences him. So if you've got a word like, of course I can't think of anything at the moment, pop versus pope, if there's a silent E on the end of it, and the baby O is in there, Mr. E doesn't like that baby, and so he starts griping, there's a baby in my word, I don't like babies. So the mother or the father O comes in and silences him. You quit teasing my baby, and silences him. But then the parent stays, and you produce the parent sound, pope. So anyway, that's the zipper. Substitution. Say the word and now change it. So this is at the phoneme. So this is phonemic awareness. The prior syllable one was phonological awareness. Say cow, now change the k to h. Say mouse, now change the s to th. So we can do that, or we can use the train. Say sheep, now change the E to I. So there's the E, sheep. Now change the E to I. And what sound do I have? Ship. Sheep to ship. Okay, another task is blending syllables. What word is this? Window, mountain, basket. So at the phonological awareness level, it's blending syllables to hear words. Window, window. That's when it's a word. Okay. And then at the phonemic awareness level, the oi, o, I, ow, s. And again, you can see what an auditory burden this is when children don't have that hierarchy we talked about at the beginning, um, trying to figure out what you're even asking them. So when children lack that hierarchy where you can just easily move between sounds and syllables and words and meaning of words and back down again. When you don't have that hierarchy, it's called not having phonemic awareness. And then when we keep presenting this auditory information and asking the children to try to figure out that meaningful word or concept from these random sounds, and it's all done auditorily, it's just an overbearing task. So if we visualize it, at what word is heard, and then if they can't get it, then we can put our pictures of 3 choices, cat or dog or rat at the top. Or we can use puzzles to help with sound blending. Cat. So cat means put your mouth in this position and keep stretching the sound. Cat. And it's going to be the same thing as cat, and it's going to be the same thing as the written word cat. So I, again, layer my visuals to help children hear those sounds. Provide greater support by having the options. And these are just some features. Open syllables is when a syllable ends in a vowel, so this would be a grown-up vowel. We would bring in the b and the grown-up e sound. This is going to be a closed syllable, so that's going to be the short vowel sound because it's between 2 consonants, so that's going to be the short a and the short babies. Okay, we've talked about onset and rhyme a lot. Here's an example when the syllable ends with the vowel. You find the vowels. R blend usually stay together. So instead of splitting it between the 2 consonants, you leave those 2 together. So now you can't leave that baby by himself at the end of a syllable. If the consonant splits here, that leaves a baby all by himself and he could run away and get hurt. So basically the adult has to come in. So now our syllable is going to be C, correct, C, correct. Okay, kids have a short attention span, 10 or 15 minutes. Don't work on all of the phonemic awareness tasks that I've shown you today, but 2 or 3 levels of a task, especially at the beginning stages. Begin teaching with some of the easiest ones and move to the more difficult ones. Use the model, lead, observe. I do one, we do one, you do one. Provide immediate feedback and corrections, which is so easy with the phonic faces and the trains, and they can see what you're talking about. Multisensory engagement is helped by the phonic faces because they can see that they can see what the letters look like, they can hear what the sounds look like, they can put their tongues in the same position, so they're getting that kinesthetic proprioceptive feedback. They can manipulate the cards themselves, and so they're getting some of that tactile feedback. And using letters to teach the sounds basically also builds that relationship to the grapheme. So we're building that network that the kids need. These are just some of the things that we've played with. This was Bob got a pot. He took off the top. He saw the big crab. He put but the pot began to tip. So we put it in the context of short reading sentences so that the children, could practice those phonological awareness or those phonemic awareness things with the different sound patterns. So we just made these little worksheets with lots of different um, words that fit that pattern, which is also great for articulation. So we introduce letter, practice identifying letter and sound, read the story containing the target letters and rhymes, find the target letter and rhymes, practice blending more words, etc. Here are some useful websites for progress monitoring tools. So in summary, we have learned about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness and phonics, which is turning it into the orthographic spelling patterns. So they're key to effective reading. Phonological awareness is necessary because it basically helps children to figure out how that alphabet works. And when you are language delayed, language disordered, you generally have very poor phonological and phonemic awareness, and basically you're going to need some help into cracking that code. We talked about the relationship between phonemes and graphemes as being mental constructs and how that's different than a letter and a sound. So a phoneme is the mental representation of a sound. A grapheme is that mental representation of a letter. And those things have to be constructed internally and can't just be memorized. Otherwise, you get that network that isn't flexible enough to be useful to the child. There are more phonemes than graphemes, and so we basically have to use those combinations, especially for the vowels, but there's also consonant digraphs. So understanding these concepts should help you understand some of the difficulties that your kids are having and help us as speech-language pathologists make a meaningful difference in the lives of beginning readers. Okay, thank you very much.